What I'm going to try to do tonight is to give you just a glimpse, and I have to recognize it's going to be a very small glimpse because there were so many things going on in so many different places with so many people. It's really hard to condense it. So in the time that we have available, we're going to talk about things that were going on over about a 60 or 70 year period in about a half an hour. So I just want you to know there's much more to the story. The things that Pam said this morning about when you recognize people around, stop them and ask them about these things, because there are people around that were there when some of these things started, and each has their perspective. And there were small conversations that took place with people in and around all the various events. So, as I pointed out, it's going to be a tall order, but we'll just kind of jump into things and see how far we can get. For all of you, and this is really the largest quad that I have seen. I have seen lots of people that I've never seen before, and what that tells me, there are lots of new people. Pam mentioned that when I became the CPO, that was the very first meeting. We had people visiting us, and it was a real honor. And many years later, to see the very first person that I was ever able to bring into the IHS become our new CPO. It's likewise an honor to see so many new people here and share. So tonight is really to share with our younger people. There are lots of people who have come into full-time service in the Indian Health Program, since say 95 to 2000. So that's less than 20 years. And there are quite a few people. So. Let me just start out by saying when I look at things that have happened in the profession of pharmacy and things that I have seen or been a small part of, or things that I have observed happening. A lot of these things. Sometimes I feel like Homer Simpson, and so I said, "Did you do this?" "No, it was already there when I got here." "I didn't do it. That was that way already." Well. There were lots of people that have come before each of us that have had the opportunity to put things, and along the way, more people have added on and just helped to move the ball forward. In recent times, I set foot in a CVS pharmacy. It could be kind of any chain, but when you set foot into a pharmacy in almost any part of the country, and you can see the offers to counsel patients, and you can see consultation areas, that really began in the Indian Health Program. We have made an impact on the entire profession of pharmacy and the health of the nation because of that. When I see other pharmacies, I was in a Walgreens pharmacy where they were doing primary care out of a pharmacy base. That kind of thing was just unheard of in the past. That would not be possible with the progress that was made in the IHS, and it continues to be made. When you go to meetings or read journals about drug therapy management and things, that the roots of that goes back to things that took place in the IHS. When you look back over the clinical pharmacy movement, and for many of you, you kind of, I think our light. I'm trying to turn the light off. That'll work. Many of you take for granted the things that you learned in clinical pharmacy programs when you were in school, but you have to go back a ways, because in the early days of the Indian Health Service, there were many people that came for 2 years. And then as they turned over and went back, many went into graduate programs. And during those 2 years, they discovered what pharmacists can really do and the impact they can really make in patient care. They took that message back to their graduate programs. Many became faculty members that helped to really shape the pharmacy profession in the area of clinical pharmacy. There are all kinds of new roles because everybody that came in did a whole lot more than just pharmacy. Pharmacy was why people came, but there's so many more things that people have done that have helped shape the system. There are not really ground rules, but a couple principles that I'd like you to just keep in mind, because there's a whole lot more than that we can ever really cover tonight. So if I say the IHS, in the early days it was the Indian Health Service, totally a federal program. Today it has changed. More than half of the program is managed by tribes and tribal organizations. So when we say the IHS today, what I'll be making generalizations about is the Indian health system. So just keep that in mind. I'm not ignoring what's happened over time, but sometimes when you're talking, you say something. I just want you to help to translate. If I use a number, sometimes specific numbers are hard to come by. So look at it as kind of an approximation or an order of magnitude. If I say in such and such year there were this many people, well, usually it was a few or something. So keep that in mind. If I use a specific name along the way, it's because I may be familiar with that person. It may or may not be the first person that really invented or innovated something, but often it's a person who somewhere in the system raised their hand, or it could be the person who did the poster session. Nobody knew about it. Everybody was doing it in several places, but somebody did the session that raised the attention. If I use the word I don't mean to take credit because it wasn't I that did it. I had the good fortune and honor to be the chief pharmacist during my career. And among all the duties that I had is I had the opportunity and the responsibility to convene a bunch of meetings. And a number of those meetings included an incredible amount of talent and just fabulous ideas. I got to sign documents, but it wasn't me that wrote many of the documents, or it wasn't me that put things in there. It was the collective you, or all the people elsewhere. So when I say I, it's kind of a convenience of something that I'm remembering, but it's really a we. And when I say we, in history, I mean all of the we that were around that time. But more importantly than that, what we learn from history and what we carry on is the we that's everybody. It's everybody here, and it's everybody that is coming after us. So let's give it a whack and see what we can do. And Pam asked that we kind of start with our standards of practice and how we came about to have our standards of practice, because they weren't always there. First thing we want to do is just recognize that we're starting with a common mission, and that common mission is improve the health status of American Indians, Alaska Natives, across Indian country. And we all serve a common mission, and regardless of the discipline, we have a multiple of different roles. And in pharmacy, over the course of time, our service in the mission has not been just in pharmacy. So it may have started in pharmacy in one form, but it really evolved into a broad set of ways. So one thing to keep in mind when you always keep mission in mind and keep it first and foremost. And all the things that were done and that people found new ways was a way to be more effective in serving our mission. Our practice standards that we have is it's kind of it's a set of principles. It's not it does not break out to a real finite set of rules and so forth, but it's really a set of principles. And it really was one of the purposes for doing this, is to help us to define and translate an oral history into some common principles. And that was a lot harder to do than you could ever imagine. I was thinking about an analogy, and I was thinking about it for anybody that's been around Indian country, especially in the Southwest. You know that there are some fabulous ruins, and where you look at adobe, that is people living in homes made of adobe, and some of that adobe, those bricks are hundreds or centuries old. And it's not that, it's kind of surprising sometimes when you think that that it's mud and clay, but somewhere along the line, somebody discovered something as simple as mixing in some straw to add strength. Well, when we look at our foundation, having a set of standards or a set of principles, it really adds the strength for the long haul. And they're common principles, but they have served us very well and will continue to do so. So I was really struggling at how to share information about the standards, and in order to share information about the standards, we have to do it kind of through stories. Stories are so important. We all have stories. We carry on traditions with stories. Sometimes it's easier to get a message across through stories, and I will guarantee you that there's not a single person in the Indian health system that doesn't have 100 stories in their back pocket. And in fact, when everybody is always envious of us because of the incredible cultural variety and experiences and the stories that we have to tell. We'll share a couple, just tidbits of some stories tonight. It's kind of important to look. I'll come back to that. Look at where we were in 1955. This is the part where in stories, some of the traditional stories, that there was a time when giants were roaming the earth, or when animals could talk. Now times have changed. We don't necessarily see the giants in the same way, and we don't talk to animals quite the same way. But just thinking about the various generations, we have had some tremendous mentors in the past that have taught us lots of things. In this particular group, you see Alan Brands. Alan Brands was a personnel guy who was assigning commission officers to healthcare programs. One of those healthcare programs was the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and he noted that he was assigning physicians, but he wondered why no pharmacists. There was never a request for pharmacists. By the way, the year is 1953. And he made contact with people in the Bureau of Indian Affairs and started asking them questions. He arranged to do some site visits with some of their staff to get a first-hand look and to make some recommendations. And when he came back, he talked with medical staff, nursing staff, because keep in mind that pretty much the physicians were writing orders, and it was nursing that was doing all of the work that we would see as pharmacy work today. So I did have the opportunity years back to talk about this with Alan Brands, and what I remember him saying is he made some recommendations, and when he was talking to somebody, they said, "Well, you seem to have a lot of good ideas, so why don't you do it?" He said, "Okay, I will." And Alan Brands became the chief pharmacist in the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1953. And then when it became the Indian Health Service, or the today's name, the IHS, he continued as the chief pharmacist until almost 1980. So, and during that time, was able to shepherd. Shepherd is not the right word. Drive is probably the word. This gives us the opportunity to share history as we saw it. I think Al, in many ways, has been deified as a genius for a lot of things, and a lot of things happened because of that. But but Al's an old Marine. And what was happening at that time in commissioned personnel, it was top down. When they made assignments, they made assignments, and there was no input any place in any of the programs. It was top down. And for the first few years of the IHS, he had the complete authority to assign people and relocate people in different places. I'm sure that there are people in the room. In fact, I know that Jerry can relate to to getting telephone calls from Al Brands at 3 a.m. about something that he learned about where they didn't where they were looking at things just a little bit differently, and Al was bringing him back into the fold. So, but in the scene, we'll also see in 1955, when the Indian Health Service came into being, on the top left, you'll see 4 pharmacists. Well, there are 2 more running around, but there were 6 pharmacists. I'm not sure. Can somebody name a site that has 6 pharmacists? There are probably several. There'd be small health centers now. But just imagine that site with 6 pharmacists has as many as the entire system. Okay, there are, when I tell you there are all kinds of little facts and things, but when the transfer, when the Indian Health Service came to be, it was called the Transfer Act. And that was because they transferred a whole series of hospitals and health centers from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now Health and Human Services, specifically under the U.S. Public Health Service. And that included 70 or 80 hospitals. And if you could imagine 70 or 80 hospitals and 6 pharmacists, and some of those were not even in healthcare facilities. And so you can see the kind of challenge there was to do things. Ray Shaw was the first director, and his mandate was to put together a basic health care system to address some significant diseases, a lot of infectious disease, but in particular TB was the one that attracted the attention. That really was kind of the disease that really brought things forward into the Indian Health Service. So a lot of things have changed over time, and in those first few people worked together, and kind of everybody knew what everybody else was doing. People freely exchanged information around. So it was thus began the beginning of an oral tradition. If you fast forward from 55 to 69, there's another group of area pharmacy officers. There is no one here tonight that was part of that group. But fast forward again to 1987, is a group of area pharmacy officers. Al was chief pharmacist until about 1980, and then his deputy, Charlie Erdeltown, was the acting chief for the next, until 85, and that's when I came in as the IHS chief pharmacist. So, this is the group of people that were kind of my team to work with, and as we began to work together as the new chief pharmacist, I realized I had an awful lot to learn. It was a big job, and there hadn't been anybody there on a full-time basis for 5 years. Although there was an acting that may sound familiar to some of you today. So, but the area pharmacy officers were a very key portion of the pharmacy program that was able to keep the ball rolling, and pretty much everybody was doing the same thing. The meetings we would have, we would not always agree with things, but when you walk out of the meeting, everybody was moving in the same direction, supporting a common mission. After about this time, from 6 pharmacists in 1955 to somewhere around 45 pharmacists in 1960. Jumping to 1970, just over 100 pharmacists, to 1980, because in the middle of that was the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, our numbers swelled to over 300 pharmacists. The problem that we all recognized among our group was we were seeing changes. There were some of the group who were just announcing that they were retiring. Al Brands had retired, and there were those changes. And the challenge that we saw is, how are we going to translate an oral history into a form that we can convey to people coming beyond us in a way that adds continuity and a common purpose in the program. Okay. And so I was in a car when we would do site visits. We'd come out to the area, and the greatest experiences that I've had in kind of on the management side would be coming to an area, and then we just drive all over the country in a government car, and that's how we got from one site to the other. And one particular time when I was in the Navajo area with Gene Smith, who was the area pharmacy officer, as we were driving back from Winslow back to Gallup late at night, we talked about all these things I was just talking about, and Jerry Toomey in the Portland area is retiring, and Bob Ashmore and Billings, and all these guys that we really looked up to retiring. And so Gene, we got to write this stuff down. We got to write this down. Well, they're still around to do it. And so Gene said, "Yep, I agree." And so we don't have travel money. And I didn't think we really had the time. So I asked Gene. I said, "Well, Gene, call a few people, and what we'll do is we'll get a hold of people that are generally in the Southwest, because they're local. We wouldn't have to do any travel." And he said, "And I'll reserve the Gallup conference room, and we'll meet." And we did. If you can read the flip charts in the back, you'll see some strange things like the assurance, providing. Okay, this is a quiz. Okay, think about the standards, and what do you see on there? That's the beginning of the standards. When we got, I recall kicking off the meeting, because it's one of those things. It's a big responsibility to try to kick off a meeting like that when when there's so much insight in the room. But so we kind of talked about some of the things that I've already talked about: the changes, what's happening in the future, and where we're headed, and the challenges that we're going to face. But the question was, how can we prepare for a future that does not include us, and have the assurance that it's going to be strong, and it's going to serve the mission, and it's going to serve Indian health and Indian communities in the way we think it should be done. And so to kick things off, and before anything was put up on the screen, we had kind of a wide-ranging discussion. But the approach we took, we just said, what are the most important things we do? So keep that in mind. What are the most important things that we do? And then we began to have a different kind of discussion. It wasn't easy. There are some folks that are here. You'll see Jim Myers. There's me right kind of in the back. Steve Foster, who is here. Bill Boyce, Rick Harrier. A frequent presenter at Quant was Art Lipman. Art started out in the IHS and was very interested in, wanted to help out. So we made use of Art Lipman as a facilitator, so we had kind of an outside voice. It was nice to have an outside voice, but one of the responsibilities as a chief pharmacist was to try to keep order in a meeting. And sometimes when you have a facilitator that kind of has his own ideas, we wanted things coming from ours. So once in a while, you'd have to kind of bring him in line. I have the distinction of being able to do something that many people wish they could. But Art was it was a great guy, and really added by having kind of an outside and a kind of the academic flair too. Okay, so let me talk about a few. What are the most important things we do? Now, in the opening, for Rick Harrier's presentation, he kind of did an executive summary and did a very nice, concise job. But one of the really important things that sets the IHS and the pharmacy service apart from other places was filling prescriptions from the medical record. There were not very many pharmacists, and a guy named Al Ripley was assigned to go to the Billings area. Jerry, was he the only one there, I think?
Yes, he was.
Okay, so Al Ripley was the only one in the Billings area, but he really pressed to be located in a clinical or in a hospital-based setting. Another remembrance of Al Brands, he said, when I started out, he says, I thought if I could get one pharmacist in every area, I'd have the world by the tail. So, yeah, we've come a long ways. But one of Al Ripley's tasks was to institute pharmacy services where they had not been there. And so when you have physicians writing orders and nurses filling, and then being a good pharmacist, he went down. He says, "Okay, now we're going to use prescription blanks like the rest of the world." And needless to say, he encountered a lot of resistance. But he listened and looked at it, and he called Al Brands, and immediately Al Brands said, "No way." And but then he thought about it and called back. He says, "Well, give it a try and see what happens." And it wasn't exactly like falling off a log, but it just made so much sense. He did something that was not like we always did it in pharmacy someplace else. It was different, but it was more effective. It saved physicians' times. Nursing was very happy because they didn't have to do it. And things like that were beginning to be discovered in other places. Keep in mind, he talked about how top down and how central the organization was. Well, immediately following that came a memo to the field that you will fill out of the patient's record from everywhere. But it was a little bit easier said than done. It was more difficult than it sounds. And filling out of the patient medical record. Now, going back to the beginning, I believe it was around 1962 when Al went up to Billings area, and it was probably 10 or 12 years before the process spread. So, we're talking throughout the 1960s, but still a long time ago, and that was an incredible foundation. And the incredible foundation, because when you look at the patient record, the information that you have of the visit and the lab tests and all the findings. So when you made suggestions or you evaluated, and it gave us the ability to really do some things. Okay, another thing that was going on also it's kind of like meanwhile in another part of the IHS on another day. Ron Gilbert was first at Fort Defiance and really got sensitized because in the emergency room came a family with a young baby that eventually died from an overdose. And since Ron Gilbert would have been the only pharmacist there, he knew it was something that he dispensed. Fast forward a little bit. Now Ron Gilbert was at Sacaton, and he took that experience and that information and did not a large control study, but he did an evaluation and looked at a number of the medications of the patients that they were seeing at Sacaton. And in his findings, there were that about or over 60% of the patients were not taking their medications correctly, and over 40% were not taking them at all. And he reported that. I don't know if that study even exists any place. If it is, it would be great to see. It's probably about a half a page long. Because, studies weren't long. They weren't long in those days. But along came the mandate to, for a patient consultation in a variety of other places. And here's one of those things. Ron played a real key role. But people were talking to patients in other places, and people recognized the cultural differences in the need to work through interpreters, specifically with Indians and Indian communities. So things were happening in so many places, but somebody raised their hand and got the attention. We've talked about the impact, and I see Bill Boyce is here. Hey, where's Bill? Bill, come on up here for a second. And while Bill Boyce is coming up, I'm gonna get a sip of water. But a lot of things have changed. Now Bill's not gonna talk for an hour. but the fast forward is where we take a seed and do something to improve what we do that changes so much.
So we're going to talk about patient consultation. I happened to be at the right place at the right time. Didn't invent any of this. It was invented by the pharmacists that were in the Indian Health Service. And I was tasked by the area pharmacy officers to develop a program that was already going on in the Indian Health Service. So the real story behind the patient consultation program is the fact that Pfizer had some money they wanted to spend. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. We put it all together and it became a reality. It did take a lot of phone calls to have that happen, and I happened to be the person that had to do that because I was tasked with that at the time. So I spent a year on the phone to the attorneys with the Public Health Service to allow us to create an agreement with an agency or a pharmaceutical company to allow them to pay for us to do this. So that took quite a bit of work. But the knowledge and the expertise of that whole program was literally the pharmacists that were in the field that put that forward. And I also had a cohort who's sitting in this room, a carrier, who won't acknowledge that he did a lot, but between the two of us, we would sit and banter back and forth about what was going on, about the development. And we were lucky enough to have a physician that had worked in the Public Health Service that was from Atlanta that ended up doing all the filming for us. And he had worked with pharmacists in the Public Health Service. And so as soon as we started to give him the examples of what our pharmacists were doing, he immediately identified the technique that we wanted to put forward. And that's the real history behind the film from hell, as Pfizer would call it.
The statute of limitations is fading fast for me, being in retirement. So it worked really well to carry out what the area pharmacy officers wanted to do, but it also helped to have Bill Boyce, Mr. Bull in the China shop, being on a mission. And so I gave Bill the names of people to call, and so he began to call. I had a title as Assistant Surgeon General, and many people thought I had power and authority. And if I said something, we ran the risk of them claiming we made a commitment to something. And there were other bits of protocol and so forth. So Bill made the calls, and so I said, if anything happens, let me know, because I will be the first one to say he's sorry. He didn't mean to know. He didn't mean to do it. He didn't know he wasn't supposed to call, and I'll make sure he doesn't do that again. And it worked well. Bill did make lots of calls. Well, people began to realize when you counsel patients, you've got privacy issues, and there were no patient consultation rooms. But the pharmacists were able to impact the, the planning. And ultimately, the very first pharmacy-based consultation room in new construction was here at PIMC. Now, this is not the day that it opened, but you see Jerry Short back in the old days when he was one of the probably 2 pharmacists. I don't know what your staff was, Jerry, when you got here.
We actually had 5.
5, okay. So you have more than 10 times that today, but the having individual consultation rooms as a way of respecting the different cultures and respecting families and people, and not talking about their health conditions in an open waiting room, and that helped change what happens in the world today. It just so happens that pharmacists do multiple different roles. And in several areas, some of the chief pharmacists or the area pharmacists also their other hat was in program planning, and a lot of the design work happened under the program planners. So we had half of the areas or more where the pharmacists were also the planners. So consultation rooms began a common standard design for every new construction. That remains that way today, and every renovation that involved pharmacy. And that impacted the design of other facilities in other places well beyond the federal government. Okay, when you have a consultation room, when you have a medical record, when you have an information base and you have access, that gives you the ability to do a few other things. And now we're getting onto primary care, but primary care had to start someplace. And generally the way it started, Tom Talamini was a pharmacist at Red Lake, Minnesota, and the pharmacy opened up to the waiting room, and in a waiting room that was packed, especially during cold and flu season, and all day long people would be there, and when they get to the pharmacy, he would dispense cold medications. So he talked to the medical staff, and he says, well, I feel really sorry for these patients. They wait all day long. And he says, why don't I just have them come to me? Because if there was a pharmacy downtown and somebody walked in, they could do that. But he says, why don't they come to me? I'll ask them a few questions. I'll find out if they've got a cold. And if it's something more than that, I'll be sure and send them to you. And in the interest of patient satisfaction, expediting things, they said, great. And so that was the beginning. That was the first OTC program, which as I mentioned, people talked to each other and spread to the point by this would be in the late '60s, and in the next probably 3 to less than 5 years, there were OTC programs everywhere. Well, if we can provide OTCs to patients, and we have the information, why not take a step forward and do chronic care medications in people that are stabilized? So the first it perhaps not the first program that did, but the one that was more formalized, because there were a couple things going on at that time. And Emory Johnson, who was the director of the IHS, asked Al Brands, he says, can you document for me, while the pharmacists are doing all these, can you document that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing? And so as various things happen, and whether or not they were planned to happen in the way they did take place around that time, and 2 studies were done. And in Cass Lake, Minnesota, was a grant application written and funded to evaluate a chronic care program. And at the same time, or literally the same time, was another program that was down here in Phoenix, and that is what we know as a pharmacist practitioner program. The wrinkle in that was that there was a much stronger focus on acute care. So one was, if you had to say one or the other, one was acute care, one was chronic care. There's a lot more to the story. In Cass Lake, the program development was around drugs and the extension of drug therapy. And then after a couple of years, Phil Anderson at Clinton, Oklahoma, kind of turned things around and made it disease management using medications. I'd like to ask Rick and Dave if you've got any other comments, because the whole time these things were going on, both Rick and Dave were down here at Phoenix. As those of you who know Rick over the years, Rick is probably the best telephone user of all. But we didn't have email. But the communication link, and that's really the important thing. The communication link, the sharing of the cross-fertilization. You guys got any comments you'd like to make?
Sure.
Oh, sure, yeah, and yeah, come on, Dave. And even if you don't have more than a few words, one of the things that is important is that you're able to attach a face with a name or faces of people who were involved in all these things.
Well, I think the first thing that you need to know is, and we need to reiterate the fact that it was that it wasn't just the Phoenix Indian Medical, it wasn't Clinton. We fed off each other. Okay, somebody would come up with an idea, well, somebody else would find a better way to do it, we'd share, and next thing you know, Leighton Toombs, who was the area pharmacy officer at about that time in the Phoenix area, talked about this breeder reactor, and he was referring to Dave and I, but there was a breeder reactor in Gallup, New Mexico, and there were breeder reactors in Oklahoma. And we were all kind of sharing and working together. So I think the most important point is it was a group. And that's why the dedication said to all the pharmacists, because we weren't the only ones. And I'll let Dave talk about the pharmacist practitioner program.
Well, I'll introduce my brief comments by saying there are many, many people who had a lot to do with the growth and development of pharmacy in Indian Health Service. Dick and Rick have mentioned several of their names. Unfortunately, many of them will probably go forever nameless because they're lost in the annals of the history of Indian Health Service pharmacy. So they were really included in the dedication, in the introduction to our book. Maybe I'll relate something that meant the most to me from the pharmacist practitioner training program, which was my little piece in this big puzzle, by telling a story, if I may. Rick and I recently attended a departmental meeting at the University of Arizona College of Pharmacy. We had a guest speaker, and that guest speaker told a story from his young experience. He had a music course, and the music instructor started out the semester with the following. Now, the rest, what follows here are the music teacher's words. Now, you damn kids, pay attention to me and get this right. Life is short, life is hard, and life isn't fair. You wrap your heads around those three things and you'll be fine as a person. All right, that's the end of what the music teacher said. My corollary to that, based on pharmacist practitioner training program experiences, is the following. Now, you damn kids, listen to me and get this straight. If you learn a little bit about basic physical diagnosis, examination, you learn a little bit about basic lab test interpretation, and you learn a little bit about basic disease pathophysiology, you'll be better pharmacists and you'll be able to take care of your patients better.
Thank you. Just kind of a word about the big environment that we were facing around that time that helped to stimulate this. And the point to keep noticing is whenever there's a vacuum, there's an opportunity. Following the Korean War, the Public Health Service became eligible as a point to serve alternative service to the draft, and so we had a steady stream of people coming that included physicians as well as pharmacists. Largely, recruitment was really not a serious issue in the IHS, and I would say for a variety of reasons. I would say it's 1985, because in early days it was a draft, and typically when we had the residency positions in Gallup, you'd have 100 people to choose from. We had lots of people to choose from, and people that were eager to do some really interesting things. But in 1969, I went to a lottery. I had a great number. My lottery number was, based on the calendar, it was 210. And prior to that time, I was 1A, which meant I was my bag was half packed for Vietnam. And the lottery came, and then the lottery and the draft, the mandatory draft, ended. So with all those things happening at that time, the supply of providers ended. At the very same time, there was the growth in the needs that were there, and people were, across the Indian country, they were just crying for people to support. We could not find, physicians and people, so they were looking for it. So the growth of the IHS had a community health medic, which was like a PA program. They have the community health aid in Alaska. There was another program that was developed with nursing, and that was kind of things that were happening that made it possible for pharmacy to recognize a vacuum. And part of that recognition, it was shorter than those other programs because we had people coming in with a prior knowledge base, and that study was objectively very positive. And there were so many things going on in so many different places. Now, another thing that was going on, you may not realize that no one other than physicians were allowed to write in that patient medical record until well into the 60s. And Dr. Lawrence Weed developed the problem-oriented medical record in the late 60s, and that was beginning to find its way and spreading across the Indian Health Service. At Shiprock, the medical staff were doing quality reviews of their healthcare program. And as they did the quality reviews of the healthcare program, one of the pharmacists, Brian Illinois, was working with the medical staff, and he then brought it to the pharmacy staff, and in an organized way looked at formalizing the concurrent review of medications. And sometime when you have a little time, do a little literature search and look for that concurrent review. And you'll see Paul McSherry's name on that, and I think Larry Rosenthal was there at the time. And that's one of those, I came to Shiprock a year later. Yeah, I thought we had been doing it forever. But it was relatively recent, and the thing to realize that across the IHS, people were not necessarily writing it in the chart, but the spread of that is how we documented the quality of care and things that we were doing. Along came in the mid 70s was the Indian Health Care Improvement Act. I was going to run right on past that, but that's the pharmacy staff in Shiprock. By then, Larry had just left, but Paul was still there. With the advent of the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, that opened the way and spurred the development of healthcare facilities, upgrading the staff. That resulted in ultimately what is now the scholarship program or the loan repayment programs that support many pharmacists. You can see from seeing 2/3 of all the pharmacists in 1955 to a tiny slice at one meeting just a few years later. Okay, back to the standards of practice. So you can see where just looking at the standards, when you have concurrent review and you have the patient's medical record and the chart, you have a good shot at assuring the appropriateness of drug therapy. So when we ask ourselves, what are the most important things that we do, that is one of those. And what the stories that we've related was the way it was able to be done. When we talk about patient consultation and the verification step in looking at outcomes, being able to counsel patients and all the fits and starts we've had along the way until we came up with a much more polished and methodical way of doing, allows us to make a standard like that has some real substance. Assuring availability, preparation, and control. That's what pharmacists were doing all along. We will not talk about that tonight, but as people came in early on, the role of the pharmacist has always been there to do those kinds of things. Providing drug information is another really really important role. Providing health promotion and disease prevention. In Pam's opening remarks this morning, she pointed to a number of opportunities, and a number of opportunities that evolve that kind of show some of the opportunities to do other things. When we talked about primary care and the management, that relates to the standard about managing therapy and how it's possible to have a standard. I don't think there are any other organizations, at the time who could ever, with a straight face, ever put standards like that together and mean it and have a way to actually do it. One of the things throughout was looking at pharmacist roles. We didn't stick with people doing just the things that they were trained to do. People had to step out and do a number of things. We have a number of great examples. I'm gonna nab Steve, because Steve has been doing a number of things that are not specifically pharmacy, and just so you can just highlight a glimpse of that, I also want to hear from Jerry. Jerry has really made healthcare quality, and I don't know how many different sites, Jerry, you have reviewed for accreditation inside the IHS and every place else, coming from that base.
As most of us have said up here, we were at the right place at the right time. We couldn't have been in a better position, and I will tell you that we all had our own mentors at the time also. Jerry, for one, for me, Dave Apgar, an incredible pharmacist at the time, just a role model for all of us. And the one thing I do want to point out is those of you that are in now, do take the time to mentor some of the younger people, because it really makes a difference in their career. One of the biggest things when we were in White River, we actually got involved in some studies with Johns Hopkins, and particularly around immunizations. And so immunizations were just part of what we did. When we screened medical records, screened the patient's chart, we screened for immunizations. It was a natural thing for us. So when I left Indian Health Service, I went to work at University of Tennessee, and they asked for somebody to volunteer to set up the immunization training program that was brand new at APHA. We wanted to become the first school to teach it. And so I volunteered to do that, set up the program there, and was working very closely with people. When I was in the Clinical Support Center, I actually knew APHA quite well, so I had the contacts there. And as they were developing the program, it was really not done well. There was a lot of mistakes in what of the slides they had in the program itself. So I kept complaining enough that they finally put me as the head of the advisory committee for this program. And by the way, complaining will get you a long ways. But I was quite honored, and this will be 1 minute. 1 minute. Look who's talking. Yeah, I know. But I had the honor, I was asked in 2001 to represent pharmacy at the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. And it was because of the public health background that we had had. And I do want you to know that as you get out, you will be known as public health officers the rest of your life. And it really is an important thing to keep in mind.
Well, I could talk a lot more than 2 minutes, but anyway, my career, actually, I spent 30 years as a commissioned officer on public health service. The last 5 years of my career, I was privileged to be at the headquarters level. Earlier on in my career, I kind of set a goal for myself I was hoping to have an opportunity to serve at all levels, from small clinics to hospitals to a medical center, which was PIMC, area pharmacy branch chief, and then go on to headquarters, where I was they established a position as director for facility certification and accreditation, and I served in that role for 4 years, did a lot of training with the Joint Commission. And when I retired, my wife thought I was going to be in the way and underfoot at home and wasn't sure what I was going to be doing. I started getting calls asking if I could assist tribal and IHS facilities prepare for accreditation surveys. So I started doing some consulting, and I still continue to do that. So this actually is my 50th anniversary of working with Indian health and tribal programs. I retired as a surveyor about a year ago, but one of the things that really has kept me going is to really focus on patient safety and quality. And what I see in the pharmacy program throughout IHS is a real strong emphasis on that. And with your implementation of the patient-centered medical home, and I was privileged to work with HHC, the accrediting organization I've worked for, to help write their medical home standards, which are very closely aligned with your IPC program. And you folks are doing a fantastic job. The surveyors for HHC, and I've been able to train them in terms of how to survey Indian healthcare and tribal facilities and urban health centers, are all just amazed at the level of service. And I was the only pharmacist surveyor out of 350 surveyors, and universally, everyone who has surveyed an Indian healthcare facility comes back and talks about the pharmacy program. And these are physicians and dentists and nurses and administrators who have had contact with you folks. So congratulations for what you folks are doing and continue to do. It's been a real pleasure for me to continue working with all you folks. Thank you.
Okay, so we're wrapping it up. What are our takeaway messages? And the first one is we share a common mission, and that mission has everything to do with the Indian people across Indian country. That's why we're here, and that's what our mission is to improve that health status. And all these different ways of doing things are ways to do it more effectively. And along the way, the mission was updated, to add the partnership thing with tribes. The second thing is, don't be bound by the way it's always been done. And you see examples where people had to look for different ways. That is also true in every respect today. Look for different ways. Just because it's been done a different way doesn't mean it should continue that way. Share your experiences. And a lot of sharing and enrichment comes through that. It's been a totally symbiotic relationship in sharing back and forth across the entire system. Continually urge and encourage innovation. Encourage people to try new things. Always be aware of patient safety. Never let a patient be hurt, but encourage people to think of new ways to make things better for the people in our communities. And one person can make a difference. Now, the individuals that are named are not necessarily that one or that only person, but when we talk about one person making a difference, that one person is everybody here, because when we all make a difference every single day with one person in our community, we all make a difference. And if we all make a difference in the same way, we, as we pointed out, have a way that we have been able to change pharmacy practice, not just in Indian country, but across the nation. And we've changed how people are trained and how they deliver care in the world. Now, Indian Health Service is really important for this nation, and you've had a role in making that happen. So, thank you. It's hard to capsulize 60 years in a few minutes and all these different things, but there are many, many more stories in these hills for many more people, and they're all wonderful. Thank you. We're not being recorded anymore.
Yeah, we stopped the recording.